Psychological Horror Diary, March 1. My name is Olof Ström, 43 years old, and this is my psychological horror diary. Dr. Ljung says it might help me sort my thoughts if I start writing down what I experience. As if my problem was that I can't organize my thoughts. No, my problem is that my ex-wife, my job, and society have conspired to place me in this damned place, the sanatorium. I arrived here 3 days ago, admitted voluntarily, if you can call threats of involuntary commitment voluntary. The sanatorium is exactly as horrible as I imagined, a massive gothic complex with dark corridors where daylight never seems to reach. The walls are stained as if the building itself sweats its own anxiety. My footsteps echo when I walk, but sometimes I hear other steps following me. Yet when I turn around, the corridor is empty. They call me paranoid. Say I have hallucinations, but they don't hear the whispers from the ventilation ducts at night. March 4 today, I met Dr. Ljung, my treating physician. She's younger than I expected, perhaps early 30s. She has an intensity in her blue eyes suggesting she sees more than she says. Tell me about the voices, Allah, she urged. I explained to her that they're not voices in my head, but voices from the wall. The building speaks. She wrote something in her notepad, her face trying to hide interest. There's a history here, she said carefully. The sanatorium was one of Sweden's first modern mental hospitals, but the methods were different in those days. Her caution made me suspect she knows more than she's willing to admit. When I walked back to my room, I met Nurse Nina Anderson for the first time. She has a strangely quiet gait, seems to appear from nowhere. Her blonde hair is always perfectly arranged, but her eyes reveal nothing. When she gave me my medications, I noticed her hands trembling. "Have you worked here long?" I asked. "Longer than anyone else," she answered, despite not appearing to be more than 35. "The walls here have many secrets, Olaf. Some things are best not to ask about." March 7 last night, I woke to the large wall clock in the corridor striking 3 deep resonating sounds that vibrated through the entire building. It's strange, the gigantic antique clock often runs wrong, stops for hours, only to suddenly start again. But when it strikes, you feel it in your bone marrow. After the clock struck, I heard a rhythmic, metallic sound. Click-clack, click-clack, as if someone was dragging something heavy along the corridor outside. When I opened the door, I saw only Nina, standing at the end of the poorly lit corridor. She stared at me without moving, her face half in shadow. When I blinked, she was gone. I know this sounds like delusions, exactly what a psychological horror story would contain. But I know what I saw. This isn't a hallucinatory horror story, it's reality. I've noticed that my room feels smaller today. The walls have come closer. I measured the distance with my steps yesterday, 8 long steps from door to window. Today it's only 6. March 10 met another patient today, Karl. He usually sits quietly in the day room, staring out the window. We haven't talked much until today when he suddenly sat across from me at the chess table. "You've started noticing it now, haven't you?" he asked, his voice lower than a whisper. "How the building breathes, how it moves." I nodded, afraid Dr. Ljung or one of the attendants would hear. "They built this place to cure madness," Karl continued while moving a pawn without following any chess rules. "But the architect was obsessed with geometries that don't follow our laws. He designed the building as an experiment, a device for collecting suffering." His words felt like icy fingers along my spine. The worst part was that it made sense. "The hospital feeds on fear," Karl said before standing up and leaving me with the chessboard in disarray. "The more afraid you become, the hungrier it gets." Dr. Ljung later told me that Karl had been at the sanatorium for 14 years. "A brilliant mathematician once," she said, before his obsession with non-Euclidean geometry drove him to a breakdown. March 13, this claustrophobic horror story about mental illness that is my life continues. My psychological deterioration is accelerating now. I barely sleep. The large clock strikes irregularly during the night, always 3 times, and each time I wake up in a cold sweat. My room is definitely shrinking. I know it sounds crazy, but the window is now only 4 steps from the door. Nina gave me extra medication tonight. When our hands touched, I saw something flicker across her face, as if another, older woman was looking out through her eyes. "You shouldn't write so much," she said, nodding toward this diary. "Dr. Ljung said I should write," I replied. "Dr. Ljung cares more about research than patients." Nina leaned closer. "She doesn't think you're sick, Olof. She thinks what you see is real." Before I could ask what she meant, she had disappeared out of the room. I flipped back through my earlier notes and discovered something disturbing. Pages I don't remember writing. Cryptic symbols and spiral patterns cover several pages. My handwriting, but not my thoughts. March 15 today, I confronted Dr. Ljung about the hospital's history. Is there any truth to what Karl says? About the architect and the building's design. Dr. Ljung closed her office door and lowered her voice. The Sanatorium was designed by Gustav Malmberg in the 1890s. He was fascinated by the occult and believed certain geometric patterns could influence the mind. Like an experiment, I asked. More like a trap, she answered. Many of the patients in those days weren't mentally ill at all, just inconvenient for their families. Rich men wanting to get rid of displeasing wives, parents ashamed of unusual children. She pulled out an old floor plan of the building. Seen from above, the corridors form a symbol I don't recognize. Gustav designed the hospital to amplify suffering and capture souls, she continued. Electroshock therapy, isolation cells, lobotomy, all were parts of his plan. "Why are you telling me this?" I asked. "Because I don't think you're psychotic, Olof. I believe you're sensitive to what exists here." March 17, the walls in my room are now only 3 steps apart. Moisture runs along the wallpaper, forming patterns that look like faces in the twilight. I've started dreaming about patients from the past, women in white hospital clothes, wandering through corridors that no longer exist, men strapped to tables, their eyes empty after treatments. This diary from a haunted hospital with supernatural elements has become my only anchor to reality. But I noticed that certain notes are written without my knowledge. Pages filled with drawings, the old clock, the corridor patterns, spirals, and symbols. I found a page where I'd drawn Dr. Ljung's face, but beneath the portrait is another woman, older, with the same eyes. Karl sat beside me at breakfast. "You'll soon find the way out," he whispered. "But that doesn't mean you'll leave." Before I could ask what he meant, he had vanished. Later that day, I learned he had been found dead in his room. Heart failure, they said, but Nina, with her shadow-like movements and hissing whispers, told me something else. He knew too much. The sanatorium doesn't let anyone go once they've understood. March 20, the clock struck 3 times again last night. I now know it's a signal. Every time it strikes, something changes in the hospital's structure. Corridors that previously went straight now curve. Doors lead to new rooms. It's as if the building is reshaping itself. When I described this to Dr. Ljung, she just nodded. Gustav believed that if he could create a building that existed partly outside our normal spatiality, he could capture the pain from patients to achieve immortality, she explained. There are reports suggesting he succeeded, at least partially. Is he still here? In a way, his consciousness perhaps spread through the walls, floors, and above all, the clock. I asked about Nina, and Dr. Ljung's gaze darkened. Be careful with Nina. She has been here longer than any of us. March 22 last night, I sat in the library researching the hospital's history. That's when I found an old photograph from 1905 when the hospital opened. Among the staff stood a woman whose face froze my blood. Nina, exactly the same, with the same penetrating gaze. The name tag in the picture, Nurse N. Anderson. When I later confronted Nina with the photo, she smiled. You're approaching the truth now, Olof. That's why the room is shrinking. The building is trying to squeeze out what remains of your resistance. Who are you? I asked. I was Gustav Malmberg's first patient, his wife. He experimented on me first before the others. When I died, he bound my soul to the hospital. She touched my hand, just as he will do with you if you don't find a way to escape. March 25, my room is now barely larger than a closet. I can no longer stretch out my arms without touching the walls. The air is thick with mold and moisture. I tried to tell Dr. Ljung, but she has been absent these past few days. I found a journal from 1946 mentioning a Dr. Ljung who worked here then with the same appearance as my Dr. Ljung. The theory begins to take shape in my mind. Both Nina and Eva are trapped here, souls bound to the hospital across different time periods. The great clock struck again in the middle of the day this time, 3 heavy strikes that made the building shake. When they quieted, there was a new door in my room, one that hadn't been there before. A door of aged wood with a symbol carved into it, the same symbol that Gustav Malmberg's floor plan formed. I know the clock is calling me now. Nina has warned me not to go through the door, that it's a trap. But Dr. Ljung says it might be the only way out. What's worse, remaining trapped in a mind slowly crushed by a malevolent building, or risking something even worse beyond that door. March 27, I went through the door. Beyond it was a room I'd never seen before, a circular chamber with a great clock hanging in the middle. Around the walls stood glass cases filled with diaries, hundreds of them. An enormous psychological horror diary collection from all who had been trapped here. In the center of the room stood an old man in a doctor's coat from the last century, Gustav Malmberg himself, his face as alive as 100 years ago, but also transparent, as if he only partially existed in our reality. Your consciousness is strong, he said. Your fear has nourished me well, but now I need more intimate company. Dr. Ljung suddenly stood beside me. Run, Olof, she whispered. Find the clock master key and stop the pendulum. Malmberg laughed as Nina stepped forward from the shadows. There is no escape, said Nina, but there's room for more souls in the walls. I rushed toward the clock as the room began to change around me. Walls bent inward, the floor surged up like a wave. I grabbed the clock's pendulum, held it still with all my strength. An ear-shattering howl filled the room as time stopped. March 30, I write these words from a new room, much brighter than my previous one. They say I was found unconscious in the basement, my hands cramped tightly around something invisible. Dr. Ljung is gone. No one at the hospital claims to know any doctor by that name. Nina remains, but she avoids me. Sometimes, when the light falls just right, I can see through her face to the emptiness behind. The hospital feels dormant. The corridors are straight again, the walls at the right distance. The great clock is silent, but I know it's only temporary. I've noticed other patients behaving as Karl did, staring out windows, whispering to each other. They have the same look I now see in the mirror. We all know the same thing. The sanatorium is not defeated. It's merely resting, gathering strength, and it will not let us go ever. I continue to write this diary, but no longer for my own sake. I write for the next person who will see what I see, hear what I hear. If you are reading this and recognize the signs, the singing walls, the whispers in the ventilation, the footsteps that follow you when no one is there, know that you are not crazy. It just means the sanatorium has chosen you as its next. Final page of Olof's diary, found in the hospital archives, dated 2005. Margin note by unknown hand. Patient number 4722, discharged 4/15/2005. Readmission planned when the time is right.